The 700-year beacon still worked. Earth's rescue vessel replied, and the dead station left orbit. The speaker on Havoc Ire's console clicked twice, hissed, and released a thin two-note beacon into the cabin. Outside the forward glass, Calyx Station turned soundlessly above the blue curve of the planet, one broken ring catching sunlight while the rest remained black. The signal had been doing that for 700 years. Havoc had heard recordings of it since his first month with the Ulori Orbital Heritage Bureau. Every schoolchild on the inner worlds knew the story of Calyx, a deep-orbit transfer station abandoned after a chain of reactor failures, emptied by its builders, stripped of power, and left in a safe memorial orbit because its central truss was too brittle to tow. Its emergency transmitter, fed by a long-life isotope stack no one had bothered to remove, kept repeating a request for structural assistance to crews who had been dead for centuries. No one answered it anymore. Then the human vessel did. Calyx Station, this is Earth Rescue Vessel Kindred Current. Distress signal received. We are approaching for structural recovery. Maintain beacon if able. Havoc stared at the translation strip beneath the audio waveform. His junior controller leaned closer. They answered the automated call. I heard them. Do they know its age? Havoc touched the transmit key. Earth vessel, this is Director Havoc Ire, Ulori Orbital Heritage Bureau. Calyx Station is uncrewed, non-functional, and protected under conservation status. Your response is appreciated, but no rescue action is required. A pause followed. The old beacon pulsed again through his speaker. A woman's voice returned, level and unhurried. Director Ire, we copied your advisory. The station is still transmitting an unresolved structural distress request. We are going to inspect before we close it. Havoc looked out at the approaching human ship. That made the exchange stranger. Kindred Current was small enough to fit through the open section of Calyx's broken outer ring. Its hull was short and broad, painted white in places, and bare metal in others. There was no visible tow spine, no heavy tractor projector, no oversized drive block, and none of the reinforced nose architecture used by Ulori salvage movers. The human ship carried rounded housings along both flanks and a row of dark rectangular panels that Havoc's system identified as power buses. Several recessed bays appeared to contain cable drums. Cable drums. Havoc enlarged the image until the ship filled his display. That is their rescue vessel, he asked. Registry confirms it, the controller said. Civil disaster response. Earth Rescue Service. Crew complement listed as 43. Havoc let out a slow breath. Then they have misunderstood the beacon. The controller did not answer. Calyx was not a drifting shuttle. Its mass had made it famous. More important, its structure had made it untouchable. The old station had been assembled around a long conductive torus with habitat spokes radiating inward and outward. Repeated thermal cycling had weakened several junctions. 2 prior Ulori recovery studies had concluded the same thing. Any conventional tow strong enough to change Calyx's orbit would concentrate force through the surviving hardpoints and tear the station apart. That was why it remained where it was. Not because the Bureau lacked engines. Because physics did not care about sentiment. Havoc opened a private channel to Kindred Current. Captain, I need your name for the incident record. Freya Mason. Captain Mason, your registry indicates a rescue craft, not a station tug. Calyx has no certified tow hardpoints. Its outer ring has multiple fatigue faults. We have modeled direct extraction repeatedly. I have the Bureau studies on my screen. That stopped him for half a second. You received them. Public archive. Your engineers were right. Pulling on it would be a bad idea. Havoc waited for the qualification. None came. Then we agree, he said. About pulling on it, yes. On the display, Kindred Current rolled 90 degrees and matched Calyx's rotation. Small attitude jets flashed along its belly. The ship did not point its main drive toward the station. Instead, it settled parallel to the ancient Taurus, almost as if the human captain intended to park beside it. A hatch opened on the ship's port flank. Something narrow slid out. Havoc magnified again. A flexible ribbon, dull silver on one side and black on the other, unspooled from a drum. It was far too thin to be a tow cable. A small guide unit carried its end toward Calyx's outer truss. Another hatch opened aft, then another along the starboard side. The controller frowned. Those are power conductors. For what? Unknown. They are not structural lines. Havoc keyed the channel. Captain Mason, you do not have authorization to attach equipment to the station. We're not attaching to the heritage skin, Mason replied. We are routing through open service trusses. No clamps, no drilled anchors, nothing bonded to original material. Routing for what purpose? Inspection first, recovery if the structure passes. There is nothing aboard your ship capable of moving Calyx. The answer took only a moment. That's the part we're checking. Havoc muted the channel and looked at his controller. Log a formal intervention notice. Violation. Not yet. She has not touched protected material. That distinction mattered. The Bureau existed because older administrations had destroyed more history trying to preserve it than time had. Havoc had spent his career enforcing rules written after those failures. He disliked improvisation near relics, but he disliked careless accusations more. So he watched. The first human guide unit crossed the darkness between the ships and slipped through a rectangular opening in Calyx's truss. It passed behind a bundle of dead coolant pipes, emerged on the far side, and continued around the Taurus. A second ribbon followed a different route. Neither touched the cracked habitat spokes. Kindred Current's exterior lights came on in a slow sequence, illuminating faded station markings. Dust and paint flakes drifted inside exposed compartments. A broken antenna boom cast a thin moving shadow across the human hull. The old beacon called again. Mason answered it again. Not with words this time. Kindred Current transmitted a short acknowledgement burst on the ancient carrier frequency. Havoc's controller sat upright. Director. What? The station responded. Havoc checked the telemetry. Calyx's beacon waveform had changed. Only slightly. A narrow timing notch had appeared after the human acknowledgement, a feature buried in the original emergency standard. A handshake, the controller said. The transmitter is automatic. Yes, but the acknowledgement state is still functional. Havoc looked back at the station. A dead machine could still complete a protocol. That did not make it alive, and it did not make it movable. Still, the change bothered him, because it proved the human captain had not simply heard an old noise and invented a rescue around it. She had read the signal well enough to talk to equipment older than several modern Ulori governments. The silver ribbons continued around Calyx. On Kindred Current, the dark rectangular bus panels began to warm. Havoc's thermal display painted them orange. Not the engines. The buses. What are they powering? He asked. His controller ran the scan twice. Current regulation, very high capacity, but I still do not see a tractor field. Because there isn't one. Then why are they energizing conductors around the station? Havoc had no answer. He opened the channel again. Captain Mason, your equipment is now carrying significant current. State your test. Low-load orbital response check. That phrase has no meaning in our tow certification tables. It will in about a minute. Havoc's fingers tightened on the edge of his console. Captain. Her voice stayed calm. Director, if the station sees more than our structural limit, we stop. If any heritage surface takes contact load, we stop. If your sensors show something mine don't, tell me and we stop. That was not the answer of a reckless salvager. It was worse, in a way. It was the answer of someone who believed she knew exactly what she was doing. The ribbons completed their paths. From Havoc's angle, they formed broad loops through the station's empty trusswork, never cinched tight, never acting like ropes. Kindred current drifted beside Calyx with almost no visible motion. The human ship's main engines remained dark. A tone sounded on Havoc's console. He glanced down. Calyx's orbital solution had changed. The number was so small, he assumed it was a filter error. He reset the track. The new solution returned. The station had gained altitude. Check ranging, Havoc said. Checking. Independent source. Using Bureau navigation beacons. The controller's hands moved faster. Outside, nothing looked different. Calyx still rotated. Kindred current still floated beside it. No drive plume burned. No tug line stretched taut. No section of the ancient station flexed enough to see. The old beacon pulsed once more. The controller went still. Director, he said, the station is moving. Havoc brought up the raw navigation solution instead of the filtered heritage display. The line representing Calyx's projected path no longer sat on top of its historical orbit. It had separated by a visible sliver and was continuing to separate. Acceleration. Steady, low, distributed if the strain sensors are accurate. They are 7 centuries old. The human ship has its own laser grid on the truss. I'm comparing both. A second set of numbers appeared. They agreed. Havoc felt the first clean fracture in his certainty. If Kindred current had been hiding a conventional tractor, the station would have shown a load gradient toward the ship. If it had fired some exotic drive against Calyx, his instruments would have seen exhaust, radiation, or field pressure. Instead, every measured section of the torus was being urged in nearly the same direction at once, as though the station itself had decided to fall differently. He looked at the silver loops and then at the planet below. Captain Mason, hold your present rate. Already holding. I am sending a Bureau inspection packet. I want your structural limits, your current map, and the principle of operation. You can have all 3. There was no triumph in her voice. That unsettled him more than triumph would have. The controller glanced sideways. Do we withdraw the intervention notice? Havoc watched the old station climb by another fraction, while its beacon continued to call into space. No, he said. Change the reason. To what? Havoc opened a new incident category, hesitated over the available choices, and found that none of them quite fit. Technical review, he said at last, and request priority observation authority from Central. For the first time since the human vessel arrived, he was no longer trying to stop a misunderstanding. He was trying to discover what, exactly, had just moved Calyx Station without pulling on it. The inspection packet reached Havoc before Central answered. He opened it expecting a human proprietary shield, an abbreviated safety summary, perhaps a request for reciprocal data. Instead, Kindred current sent engineering diagrams, load limits, emergency cutoffs, conductor temperatures, and a plain language note that began with a sentence Havoc reread twice. We are not towing the station. Beneath it, another line followed. We are making the station interact with the planet's magnetic field. The controller read over his shoulder. Electrodynamic translation. Havoc knew the term from satellite station keeping. Tiny craft sometimes used long conductive tethers to exchange momentum with a magnetosphere. The effect was old, slow, and useful mostly because it required little propellant. No one used it on a dead transfer station. He scrolled. The human system was not a single tether. The ribbons passing through Calyx's truss were independent current paths. Kindred Current's power buses drove them in carefully timed phases, while plasma contactors on the rescue ship closed the circuit through the surrounding charged environment. Instead of applying force at a tow point, the system created electromagnetic force across the conductive loops distributed around the station's mass. The station was not being pulled. Its orbit was being edited by current. Havoc opened the structural model beside the human diagram. The logic was irritatingly simple once both were on the same screen. Yulori teams had spent generations asking how to make a tug strong enough while keeping Calyx from tearing around the tug's attachment points. The humans had accepted the warning and removed the attachment point from the problem. "How much acceleration can they produce?" he asked. "Not much at the present field strength." "Then they cannot extract it." The controller enlarged another part of the packet. "They do not need a high rate. They need sustained change." Havoc looked at the projected track. Calyx had centuries of momentum, but orbit was not a wall. A small force applied continuously could become a very large positional change. He knew that. Every orbital professional knew that. What bothered him was that he had never connected the fact to rescue doctrine. Central finally responded with a text order: observe, do not certify, preserve heritage priority. That sounded like Director General language. It gave Havoc room to watch and no room to approve what he was seeing. He sent the order to Mason. "Understood," she said. "You are not certified to move the station." "Also understood. Yet you are continuing the test. At inspection power, your heritage rules prohibit damaging contact. They do not prohibit measuring response to a non-contact field interaction." Havoc closed his eyes briefly. "You read our code quickly. We rescue in other people's jurisdictions a lot." That at least sounded human in a way he recognized from diplomatic briefings. Practical, not reverent about categories, but annoyingly attentive to the exact wording of a safety rule. "I am sending a bureau conservator to your vessel," Havoc said. "You will not increase power until she verifies the load map." "Agreed." The conservator crossed in a small transfer pod. Havoc stayed aboard the bureau inspection craft and watched her helmet feed as she entered Kindred Current through a bright, narrow airlock. The human rescue ship looked less impressive inside than it had outside. That surprised him. The passage walls were covered with clipped emergency bags, patch kits, folded blankets, sealed water pouches, and handholds polished by use. A fan somewhere clicked once per rotation. Someone had wedged a soft foam block under a cabinet latch to stop it rattling. The deck plating was scratched. Nothing had the ceremonial finish of a Yulori heritage vessel. Then the conservator reached the current control room. The room was built around power. Thick insulated buses ran behind transparent shields. Banks of switching hardware surrounded a central table covered with a live map of Calyx. Each silver rescue ribbon appeared as a separate line, and each line was broken into thermal, current, strain, and clearance data. The operators were not watching one giant force number. They were watching the station section by section. Captain Mason stood near the table with Chief Engineer Nico Serin, a compact man with gray at his temples and a grease mark on one sleeve. The conservator pointed toward the map. "Your limit is below our predicted failure threshold." "Well below it," Serin said. "Then why is this segment yellow?" "Because your old model was optimistic there." He enlarged an outer truss junction. A slight temperature rise had appeared where one loop passed near corroded conductive material. Havoc leaned closer to his feed. Serin continued. "The station is carrying some of our induced current through itself. We expected that. We did not expect this much at this joint." "Can you isolate it?" the conservator asked. "Yes, but not by pretending it isn't there." Mason looked toward the camera. "Director, we're dropping translation rate while we remap the junction." Havoc checked the orbit track. The human-induced acceleration decreased almost immediately. They had found a weakness and slowed down. No argument, no attempt to prove the system could power through it. That mattered. Permission to place temporary non-bonded bridge conductors in the open truss, Mason asked. The conservator answered before Havoc, if they are fully retrievable and load neutral. They are. Havoc added, document every contact surface. Already recording. He should have found the answer irritating. Instead, he found himself studying the human current map with the intensity he usually reserved for accident reconstructions. The old beacon sounded again from his console, faint through the open comm channel. This time, he heard something he had ignored for years. The distress message was specific. Propulsion unavailable. Structural integrity degrading. Request external translation to stable orbit. Not evacuation. Not medical aid. Translation. Controller, Havoc said, pull the original Calyx incident archive. I want the first translation of the beacon, not the modern summary. The archive package is large. Then search the emergency phrase. A minute later, the historical text appeared. The first Yulori surveyors had translated the request correctly. Later summaries had shortened it to automated distress beacon, crew lost, no active casualty. Over centuries, the procedural label had replaced the actual words. Havoc read the original again. External translation to stable orbit. The human vessel had not interpreted the signal more creatively than the Bureau. It had interpreted it more literally. On the current control feed, Serin and the conservator fitted a temporary conductive bridge around the corroded joint using broad insulated pads that rested against modern debris surfaces rather than original plating. The yellow segment on the map cooled toward green. Mason did not order power restored immediately. She waited until the conservator nodded. Then she said, bring it up one step. Kindred Currents buses warmed. The silver ribbons glowed only on thermal imaging. Calyx continued its slow departure from the track it had occupied for 7 centuries. Havoc watched the load graph. No hardpoint spike appeared. No cracked spoke bent. No outer ring began to wobble. The entire station accepted the force as a broad, gentle change. Central sent another message. Does Earth claim recovery, RIGHTS? Havoc forwarded the question to Mason. Her answer came at once. No, property is yours. Response is ours until the distress condition is closed or you order us away under a rule that accepts the structural risk. Havoc read that sentence carefully. You distinguish possession from response priority. Of course. Rescue is not ownership. He looked at Calyx, then at the human ship beside it. For a moment, the old categories shifted again. A vessel that could move the station, but did not claim it was harder to classify than a salvager. A captain who had enough confidence to start an impossible recovery and enough restraint to stop for a warm joint was harder to dismiss than a showpiece engineer. The controller cleared his throat. Director, the projected orbit now crosses the Bureau's heritage maintenance boundary. Havoc opened the track. The change was no longer a measurement artifact or an inspection curiosity. If kindred current continued, Calyx would leave the orbit in which Yulori law had defined it for centuries. The technical question had become an institutional one. And Central had just noticed. The next instruction arrived with an authorization seal Havoc could not ignore. Halt orbital change AT heritage boundary. Hold station pending sovereign review. He read it once, then transmitted it to kindred current. Mason acknowledged without argument. The current graph fell. Calyx's acceleration tapered almost to zero, leaving the station on a new orbit but not yet beyond the legal line. The ribbons stayed in place. The human ship maintained station beside the relic. That was quick, the controller said. Havoc knew what he meant. Anyone trying to steal a relic would have used the moment of technical advantage. Anyone trying to demonstrate superiority would have protested the order. Mason had simply stopped because the person with jurisdiction had told her to stop. Central followed with a demand for a complete capability explanation. Havoc sent the diagrams. A reply came back less than a minute later. Model CLAIMS, impossible force distribution. Verify independently. Havoc almost smiled. He had thought the same thing. He ordered the Bureau's navigation array to run an independent reconstruction using only external ranging and visible human equipment. The system calculated the station's changed momentum, compared it with Kindred Current's engine output, and failed the first solution because the engines had not produced enough thrust to explain the shift. Havoc manually enabled electromagnetic environmental forces. The model converged. The controller stared at the result. It matches. Send it. With what conclusion? Havoc looked at the old station. Its beacon continued to pulse. The human ribbons floated through its trusses like loose bands because none of them needed to become a rope. Conclusion, he said. The Earth vessel has demonstrated controlled orbital translation of Calyx without certified tow hardpoints and without exceeding observed structural limits. The controller entered the words. Havoc added one more line. And note that the vessel stopped on command while the capability remained active. That was the part Central needed to understand next. Central did not answer for several minutes. During the silence, Calyx drifted through the new path Kindred Current had already given it. Nothing was accelerating now, but the station could not return to its old orbit by wishing. The change had become physical. Havoc watched the heritage boundary marker creep closer on the display. A weather notice opened in the corner of his console. The planet's magnetosphere was becoming unsettled as a charged solar front approached from the dayside. Ordinarily, that mattered only to navigation planners and exposed satellite operators. With human rescue ribbons wrapped through Calyx, it mattered to everyone watching the current map. He forwarded the notice to Mason. We have it, she said. Field strength will rise before the front arrives. Does that make your method unsafe? It makes it stronger. Safety depends on what we do with that. Again, no boast, just a condition. Central finally transmitted a decision. Heritage priority remains in force. Calyx may not depart registered orbital zone. Bureau assets will establish physical hold pending review. Havoc stared at the phrase physical hold. They are sending mooring units, the controller said. I can read it. Director, our standard mooring load assumes a stationary target. Kindred Current is holding translation. For now. Havoc opened a channel to Mason. Central is deploying Bureau hold units. They will attach only to modern reinforcement collars installed during the last stabilization survey. I see the collars on your drawings. They are certified. For maintaining local attitude, yes, not for opposing our harness. You are ordered to keep the harness at 0 translation. Then the moorings are safe as long as the field stays quiet. Havoc looked at the weather notice. And if it does not, then your lines become the concentrated load your own studies warned about. The Bureau units arrived from the near-side orbital depot, compact unmanned craft with articulated booms and heavy synthetic lines. They moved carefully, approaching Calyx from opposite directions. Havoc approved each contact point. The clamps closed around modern reinforcement collars, not ancient hull. On Kindred Current, the current control team changed nothing. For a time, the arrangement held. Calyx floated between the small human rescue vessel and the Bureau mooring units. Silver conductor ribbons threaded through its structure, synthetic hold lines drawn outward from two modern collars. It looked less like a relic now, and more like an argument expressed in hardware. Central sent a new question. Can Earth system be removed without altering current orbit? Mason answered through Havoc. Yes, but the station will remain on the orbit we already gave it. Removing the harness does not undo momentum. Havoc forwarded the reply. Central, can Bureau moorings return it? Havoc asked his controller to calculate. The result came quickly and unpleasantly. The mooring units had enough propellant to change Calyx's local attitude, not enough to reverse the accumulated orbital shift without multiple support tugs and a carefully staged operation. He sent that too. The silence from Central lengthened. Mason spoke privately. Director, I can put Calyx into a stable holding path outside the heritage zone and wait for your legal review there. That would still remove it from its registered orbit. Yes. Which Central has forbidden. Yes. Then why offer it? Because the current orbit is no longer the safest place to wait. Havoc checked the environmental model. The solar front would steepen the local magnetic field and increase drag in the planet's upper exosphere. Neither effect was catastrophic by itself. Together, they narrowed the safe margin around Calyx's newly altered path. You knew the solar front was coming when you began. We had the forecast. We expected to complete the translation before it arrived. Your review changed the timing. There was no accusation in the sentence. That made the fact sharper. Havoc's decision to halt had been legitimate. Central's review was legitimate. Yet delay now had a cost because the physical world did not suspend itself for jurisdiction. What happens if we do nothing? Probably nothing dramatic, Mason said. The station rides the front, your moorings fight small attitude changes, and everyone gets lucky. I don't build rescue plans around probably. Havoc almost objected to the word lucky, then stopped. His own accident reports used colder language for the same thing. He requested authority to relocate Calyx to the stable holding path. Central denied it. Then came the order that changed the tone of the operation. Bureau moorings will maintain heritage position. Earth vessel will de-energize and retrieve all conductors. Havoc read the environmental forecast again. Captain Mason, I have the order. Can you comply safely? A pause. Not on the schedule Central wants. Explain. Field strength is already rising. The ribbons are carrying passive induced current even with our drive buses down. If we pull them out quickly, they can arc across damaged station metal. We can retrieve them slowly and safely. How slowly? Longer than Central's deadline. Havoc looked at the Bureau mooring lines. They remained straight and calm. Can you isolate the ribbons entirely? Yes, by controlling current through them. Which means keeping the system active. Correct. Central wanted the human capability removed because it had become the source of the legal problem. Physics had turned that removal itself into a controlled operation. Havoc sent the technical explanation. Central replied with a harder instruction, moorings hold. Earth maintains only minimum current required for safe retrieval. No translational commands. Mason accepted. The first ribbon began to withdraw. For several minutes, the human guide unit reeled it through Calyx's truss centimeter by centimeter. The current control room adjusted phase to prevent contact arcs. The Bureau mooring units compensated for tiny attitude changes. Then the solar front reached the planet's magnetic envelope. Havoc saw it first, as noise spreading across the field monitor. Kindred currents saw it as current. Every silver ribbon on the station brightened on thermal imaging at once. Alarms sounded aboard the Bureau craft. The mooring lines snapped taut. Not broken, taut. Calyx began to rotate against them as the changing magnetic field induced uneven forces through its conductive frame. Load rising on Carlo 1, the controller said. Havoc watched the number climb. Tell the mooring unit to pay out. Central ordered hold. I am local authority, pay out. The first line extended. The second automatically tightened to compensate. Second collar rising. Havoc swore under his breath and opened all channels. Kindred current, can you stabilize the station without translating it? Mason answered immediately. Yes, but I need full harness control. Central restricted you to minimum current. Then your moorings take the load. A strain warning appeared on Calyx's old truss near the second reinforcement collar. Havoc felt the choice become brutally simple. Hold the legal position or hold the station together. Full harness control authorized for structural protection, he said. The response aboard Kindred Current was visible before it was audible. The rescue ship's bus panels flared hot on Havoc's thermal display. Current shifted through the remaining ribbons. One loop went dark while another brightened. Calyx's rotation slowed. The mirroring loads dropped. Director, Mason said, I can keep your units attached, but they must stop trying to fix position. Set them to follow load, not coordinates. Controller, do it. The mirroring units switched modes. Their lines slackened. For the first time since Central's intervention, human and Ulori systems were no longer fighting one another. Calyx steadied. Then Havoc saw the orbital trace change again. Captain Mason, you are translating. The field front is translating us, whether we command it or not. I'm choosing the direction. Toward the holding path. Toward the only path that keeps the loads distributed. The station began climbing away from the heritage boundary. Central noticed at once. Unauthorized orbital departure. Restore position. Havoc did not forward the order. Mason could already see it on the shared channel. Can you restore position? He asked. Yes. Safely. Not without putting your moorings, and the cracked ring under more load than I'm willing to accept. Havoc heard the key word. Willing. Not capable. The human ship had the control authority to fight the field front harder. It could force the station back toward the registered zone. The engineers simply refused to use that authority if the price was damage. Central sent another order, this time directly to Mason. Earth vessel will cease interference. Bureau, ASSUMES control. Mason answered in the same calm tone she had used when the station first moved. Bureau control is available. Tell Director Ayer to take it. We will hold structural protection while you choose the orbit. Havoc froze. A control transfer request appeared on his console. Kindred Current was offering him command authority over the target orbit, while retaining only automatic structural limits. The human captain was not taking Calyx from the Ulori. She was asking the Ulori to choose where it went, provided they did not break it getting there. Havoc placed his hand over the authorization pad. The solar front continued to build outside. The old beacon pulsed through his speaker, still asking for external translation to stable orbit. For 7 centuries, the Bureau had called that request obsolete. Now the station was moving. Central was demanding its old coordinates back, and Havoc had been given a choice no Ulori procedure had ever imagined. He accepted the transfer. The navigation display changed. Instead of a warning that the human vessel was violating a boundary, Havoc now saw a set of safe orbital choices generated from the same structural limits he had been watching all day. One path returned toward the heritage zone with rising collar stress. Another held altitude but left Calyx exposed to the worst of the field front. The third climbed outward, crossed the registered boundary, and settled into a departure corridor that led away from the planet. "Director," Mason asked. Havoc selected the third path. Central's channel erupted with objections. He answered them himself. Local authority has assumed navigation control. Heritage position is secondary to structural preservation under Emergency Article 9. The controller looked at him. Article 9 applies to active casualties. Havoc kept his eyes on Calyx. Then Central may decide whether a station transmitting an unresolved distress call is active after we stop it from coming apart. Kindred current increased current smoothly. The Bureau mooring units followed instead of resisting. Calyx climbed. Havoc felt the old model fail completely, but the replacement had not settled yet. He still did not know what the Yulori should call a civilian ship that could take command of a station's orbit, hand that command back, and remain powerful enough to refuse an unsafe order. He only knew that small rescue vessel no longer described the problem. The departure corridor was not an escape route yet. Calyx still had to cross the outer edge of the planet's controlled orbital envelope while the solar front pressed unevenly against the magnetic field. Kindred current could guide the induced forces, but it could not make the environment stop changing. Havoc watched the safe path marker advance across his display. Central continued transmitting questions, objections, and requests for authority confirmation. He answered the ones that mattered and ignored the duplicates. His emergency article citation was valid, but narrow. If Calyx reached a stable path intact, Central would have to review his decision. If the station broke, the argument would end differently. Mason opened a channel. "Director, I recommend releasing the Bureau moorings before field peak." Havoc looked at the lines, extending from the two unmanned units. "Why now?" "They helped when you needed local control. Now they are extra concentrated loads. We can carry them in formation until they detach, but the safer configuration is no lines." Havoc consulted the controller. "Agreed," the Yulori said. "Their propellant reserve is adequate for independent return." Havoc authorized release. The first clamp opened. Its line reeled back into the mooring unit, and the craft drifted away from Calyx under its own thrusters. The second followed a moment later. Nothing dramatic happened. That absence was its own piece of evidence. Kindred current did not surge when the restraint disappeared. Mason did not increase translation merely because no Yulori hardware remained attached. The station continued at the same measured rate toward the path Havoc had selected. "Moorings clear," the controller reported. "Thank the human captain." The controller glanced at him. "You are on the same channel." Havoc realized he was tired. "Captain Mason, moorings are clear. Continue selected path." "Continuing." The old beacon pulsed. For a while, the operation became almost quiet. The Bureau Conservator remained aboard Kindred Current beside the current control table. Through her feed, Havoc saw Chief Serin checking ribbon temperatures with one hand while he ate something from a sealed packet with the other. A crew member passed the Conservator a water pouch. The clicking fan in the passage continued its slow complaint. Someone pushed the foam block more firmly beneath the rattling cabinet latch. The ordinary details made the scale outside harder to ignore. A ship with scratched deck plates and improvised anti-rattle foam was moving a station the Bureau had classified as effectively immovable. Not quickly, not violently, but undeniably. The current map changed color near the corroded truss junction. Serin stopped eating. "Captain." Mason stepped to the table. "I see it." Havoc leaned toward his console. "Problem. The station's own conductive ring is picking up more current as the field steepens," Mason said. Our temporary bridge is holding, but the old metal beyond it is heating. Can you bypass that section? We can shift more of the circuit into our ribbons and less through Calyx. Cost. Higher load on Kindred Currents buses, lower load on the station. Structural risk. Reduced. Havoc waited. Mason added, it will slow the climb. Central had sent a fresh instruction asking for the fastest possible exit from the emergency condition. Havoc could almost hear the legal office behind the wording. Get Calyx stable, end Article 9, regain ordinary jurisdiction. Use the safer configuration, he said. Copy. The current control room moved without rush. Operators shifted phase between the ribbons. Thermal color drained from the ancient truss and intensified along Kindred Currents' external bus panels. The rescue vessel began carrying more of the electrical burden itself. Its hull temperature rose. Havoc watched the station's translation rate fall. The solar front did not care. Field monitors climbed toward peak. Charged particles rattled across exposed sensors, filling the displays with brief white noise. Calyx's old antenna boom trembled slightly as induced currents ran through dead metal that had not carried purposeful power in centuries. Then the station twisted. It was a small motion, barely visible against the planet, but every strain monitor reacted. Torque imbalance, the controller said. On the human feed, Serin pointed at the current map. Cross-coupling through the inner torus. It's making its own loop. Havoc understood enough now to know why that was bad. The human system depended on controlling where current flowed. Calyx's ancient conductive structure had become an unplanned parallel path. Can you cut power? He asked. We can, Mason said, but the environmental current stays. Cutting control gives the station the circuit. The load graph on one habitat spoke climbed. No one on Kindred. Current raised their voice. Mason said, take the port ribbon negative. Shift starboard forward. Serin, give me a path around the torus. Working. Director, I need permission to use the temporary bridge above its inspection, rating for a short interval. Havoc checked the conservator's feed. She was already studying the same numbers. Conservator. She answered, bridge remains below material limit. The rating margin was procedural. I approve. Approved, Havoc said. Kindred current rotated a few degrees, not to pull on Calyx, but to change how its plasma contactors met the surrounding charged flow. Current reversed through one ribbon and increased through another. The unwanted loop in the station weakened. The habitat spoke load, stopped climbing. For several seconds it held. Then it fell. Havoc let out a breath he had not noticed holding. Torque is coming down, the controller said. On the human ship, Serin kept his eyes on the map. Not done. Field peak in the next interval. Mason nodded. Then we stay boring. No acceleration increase. Havoc almost laughed at the word. Outside, Calyx Station was crossing a planetary orbital boundary under the control of conductive ribbons and a rescue ship, whose captain had just declined the easiest chance to use a stronger field for a faster result. Boring was not the word he would have chosen. The field peak arrived as a broad surge rather than a strike. Kindred Currents' bus temperature climbed to the top of its green band. The silver ribbons bowed slightly where charged flow pressed against them. Calyx's rotation shifted, corrected, and settled. The departure marker approached the edge of the display. Central transmitted, confirm controlled status. Havoc looked at the strain graph. Controlled, he replied. Another message arrived. Confirm Calyx will not return to registered orbit without active maneuver. He checked the orbital solution. The answer was already obvious. Confirmed. Calyx had crossed beyond the last closed path around the planet. Its new trajectory led outward toward a stable deep space transfer where a proper conservation yard could meet it. Returning, the station would now require another deliberate orbital change. The dead station had left orbit. There was no engine flare to mark the moment. No ancient reactor woke. No hidden drive unfolded from the relic. Kindred Current's main engines remained at low station-keeping power, while the rescue harness did exactly what Mason had said it would do. It changed the station's relationship with the planet until gravity no longer brought Calyx back around. The controller stared at the trajectory line, 700 years in one orbit. Havoc looked at the small human ship beside the huge dark ring. Not anymore. The old beacon transmitted again. This time Kindred Current's acknowledgement followed before the echo left Havoc's speaker. Central went silent for long enough that he thought the channel had dropped. Then a new order arrived. It was not addressed to Mason. It was addressed to Havoc. Submit reclassification recommendation. He sat back. The Bureau had plenty of categories for relics, derelicts, hazards, salvage claims, memorial structures, and active rescue casualties. It also had categories for foreign civilian craft, technical auxiliaries, station tugs, and military support vessels. Calyx had exposed the weakness in both lists. Havoc opened the incident form. For the station, he selected active distress recovery instead of inert heritage object. For Kindred Current, he rejected station tug because that described a machine that pulled. He rejected medical auxiliary because it ignored what the ship had just done. At last, he entered a new provisional classification in plain language. Mass structure rescue vessel, distributed orbital recovery capable. The controller read it. Central will complain that the class does not exist. They asked for a recommendation. Havoc added the operational consequence. Foreign responder priority may apply to unresolved structural distress even when no living crew remains, provided ownership is not claimed and local authority retains destination control. He thought of Mason handing him the target orbit while keeping only the right to prevent structural damage. That distinction belonged in the rule. Central returned the form with comments. Not approval, not yet. A request for narrower language, then a question about heritage review, then a demand that the new status expire when the distress condition was formally closed. Havoc revised the wording. Mason waited. She did not ask whether the Bureau had finally recognized what her ship could do. She asked whether Ulori wanted Calyx delivered. Havoc sent coordinates for the outer conservation rendezvous point. Ownership remains Ulori, he said. Never in question, Mason replied. Bureau inspectors remain aboard through transfer. Welcome aboard. And no further orbital change after rendezvous without local authorization. Agreed. Central approved the amended incident status. A second notice followed, distributed across the Bureau network. Active legacy beacons were no longer to be silenced, archived as noise, or converted to memorial-only status until a structural rescue review had been completed. Foreign craft answering such signals would receive responder assessment before heritage enforcement action. It was procedural language, dry, cautious, full of conditions. Havoc trusted it more than praise. On his forward display, Calyx grew smaller as the Bureau inspection craft fell behind and prepared to return to the planet. Kindred Current remained beside the station, guiding it toward the rendezvous point with the same steady current that had first shifted its orbit. The Bureau conservator sent one last image from the human ship. The current control table showed the station loads back in the green. Chief Serin had returned to his half-finished food packet. The foam block still held the cabinet quiet. Havoc saved the image to the incident file. Then he closed the old heritage summary that had labeled Calyx's signal obsolete. The inspection craft turned homeward, leaving no tow wake behind it, only an outbound track on Havoc's screen. He watched that line until the navigation system stopped calling it an anomaly and stored it as traffic. Outside, the planet's blue curve slipped lower behind the station's broken ring. Calyx's beacon flashed amber once in the dark, kindred current answered, and the curve of the planet dropped completely away beneath them.